Hello, I'm Charles Reitz, and here to speak to you today about the vibrancy of Marcuse's vision 2025-2026. Let me sum up some things that we all know about Herbert Marcuse that express some of the key reasons why we are all here. But first, as a USer, I say thank you to Canada and York University for creating this opportunity for creative critical thinking and strategizing. We're here because we know the whole world needs to be learning from Marcuse today, both out of authentic philosophical interest and for our very own survival. Marcuse's work directly addresses so much that urgently concerns us today: ecological destruction, neo fascism, white supremacy, hate speech, racist police killings, the genocide and ecocide in Gaza. Marcuse developed the radical goals of socialism and elucidated the rationale and feasibility of a multicultural, eco-socialist, humanist future, building a new world system of social justice, a new system free of racial, ethnic, and gender oppression, driven by the quest for the liberation of labor, restoration of nature, and humanity's needs for a life with abundance, leisure, and peace. We need to learn from Marcuse on educational philosophy. This includes his theories of art as alienation and art against alienation. We have a real crisis in higher education now. Marcuse's critique of education was a key part of One Dimensional Man back in 1964. Let me quote: "We submit to the peaceful production of the means of destruction, to the perfection of waste, to being educated for a defense which deforms the defenders and that which they defend." Likewise, One Dimensional Man warned us of the quote, "the pre-established harmony of scholarship and the national purpose, scholarship tending to serve the priorities of the 1%. In 1968, he wrote, quote, "To create the subjective conditions for a free society, it is no longer sufficient to educate individuals to perform more or less happily the functions they are supposed to perform in this society or extend vocational education to the masses. Rather, we must educate men and women who are incapable of tolerating what is going on, who have really learned what is going on, has always been going on, and why, and who are educated to resist and fight for a new way of life." Marcuse sees aesthetic education as a foundation of critical theory, conveying a humanistic sense with political potential. We also need to learn from Marcuse's critique of genocide and ecocide in Vietnam, as this applies now to genocide in Gaza, and a critique of Israeli and U.S. militarism. Marcuse addressed the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts of the 60s and 70s in 4 disparate yet direct statements: thoughts on Judaism, Israel, etc. Israel is strong enough to concede. And then he had a conversation with Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan and an interview with the Street Journal. We thus have a conclusive account of Marcuse's critique of Israeli policies vis-a-vis Palestine well prior to the Israeli-Gaza war of 2023-2025. Let me quote Israeli philosopher Zvi Tauber on this. Marcuse's view regarding the state of Israel stands in contrast to the prevalent Zionist ideology on a crucial matter. He does not recognize the historical, mythical rights of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, rights ostensibly originating in the Bible or in some belief in the land's primordial belonging to this people, ostensibly valid throughout history to this day. The very establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and its conquests in the Six-Day War were for Marcuse also unjust to the Palestinians. End quote, Tauber. Tauber tells us that Marcuse was surprised to hear an explicit admission from then Minister of Defense Moshe Dayan that the State of Israel was in fact established on Palestinian land. And after having been a defender of Israel's policies earlier in his life, by 1970 Marcuse had a radical change of heart after an Amnesty International report of the Israeli torture of Arab prisoners and learning that 32 children had been killed in a bombing near Cairo. In 1970, Marcuse wrote, "Now, if these reports are correct, it seems to me that precisely as a Jew and as a member of the New Left, I can no longer defend Israeli policies, and that I have to agree with those who are radically critical of Israel." In 1972, Marcuse also wrote of the war in Vietnam, quote, "The genocidal war against people is also ecocide insofar as it attacks the sources and resources of life itself. It is no longer enough to do away with people living now. Life must be denied to those who aren't even born yet by burning and poisoning the earth. The bombs are meant to prevent the people of North Vietnam from undertaking the economic and social rehabilitation of the land." Unquote. We also need to learn from Marcuse's theory of repressive tolerance with regard to racist and fascist speech and violence in the USA. Marcuse explained how and why there should be no pure tolerance of hate speech or fascist speech. The classical liberalism of John Stuart Mill intended speech protections primarily for the powerless minority voices expressing dissent against the prevailing ideology and its power structure, not to protect voices of dominant parties that are already hegemonic. Marcuse's partisanship is clear. Quote, "The small and powerless minorities which struggle against the false consciousness and its beneficiaries must be helped. Their continued existence is more important than the preservation of abused rights and liberties which grant constitutional powers to those who oppress these minorities." Unquote. And the violence that actually prevails in the ostensibly peaceful centers of civilization today, Marcuse says, quote, "is practiced by the police, in the prisons and in the mental institutions, in the fight against racial minorities. This violence indeed breeds violence." Marcuse holds that within the framework of the established reality, peaceful protest runs up against the limits that police power sets against it, after which it will encounter the force of police violence. Between May 26th and July 27th in 2020, 115 U.S. protesters, for example, were shot in the head with kinetic impact projectiles, according to Physicians for Human Rights in a 2020 publication. Older Americans may well remember the law enforcement violence implicated in the deaths of nonviolent activists Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney in 1964, the brutality of Selma's Black Sunday 1965, and Chicago's Democratic Convention, the police riot of 1968, plus the killing of student protesters by National Guardsmen at Kent State in 1970. Today we have massive civil rights violations by ICE, the U.S. government, utilizing fascist tactics, masked men with military arms, including racial profiling and violence in public places to terrorize and arrest people in neighborhoods, supermarkets, even courtrooms across the U.S., most recently in Charlotte, Chicago, and Portland. Marcuse again on violence in 1965. This quote, is practiced by the police in the fight against racial minorities, and this violence breeds violence. We need to learn from Marcuse's 1974 Paris essays on the need for critical political economy, and from his 1972 and 1979 essays regarding the need for an eco-socialist world system. In Marcuse, one encountered what was lacking in other members of the Frankfurt School, an analysis of advanced industrial society, workforce rebellion as a resource with strategic power. Herbert Marcuse recognized the importance of ecology to the revolutionary movement and the importance of the revolutionary movement for ecology. He is the singular member of the Frankfurt School to occupy himself with wide-ranging ecological issues. A quote from Essay on Liberation. This society is obscene in producing and indecently exposing a stifling abundance of wares, while depriving its victims abroad of the necessities of life, obscene in stuffing itself and its garbage cans, while poisoning and burning the scarce foodstuffs in the fields of its aggression, obscene in the words and smiles of its politicians and entertainers, its prayers, in its ignorance, and in the wisdom of its kept intellectuals. Neoliberalism and now Trumpism have replaced what Marcuse originally described as the comfortable, smooth, democratic unfreedom of the 1960s USA. We now have something more openly vicious. Marcuse called this new stage counter-revolution in his 1972 volume Counter-Revolution and Revolt, and expressed the necessity of addressing anew the radical goals of socialism. For Marcuse, these went beyond the elimination of want and poverty. They involved a qualitative leap in needs and values. The fullest development of socialism, communism, frees labor from its commodity form so that it may return to being common work for the commonwealth. Labor's liberation from commodification and its sublation to the new commonwealth form allows human life to be infused with beauty from its foundations up, ultimately for the entire society to express itself as a work of art. Marcuse's strategy is that system negation can have the appeal of a new general interest. Our task is to contribute as best we can to help the future generations understand the justice of the world's desire for revolutionary ecological liberation and for the beauty of an eco-socialist world system. Marcuse's vision was that of an aesthetic ethos that might become a gesellschaftliche Produktivkraft, that is to say, a social and productive force, and that our sensuous living labor with imagination and reason might become the sensuous living freedom of the global human community. Thank you very much.